first session of this afternoon, we're going to focus on the Testing Agriculture Performance Solutions Program, which is now crossing multiple states. So you hear from some of the folks from each of those states, and how it helps us redefine how we introduce agricultural innovations through a wide variety of stakeholder collaborations and having fun to game it out over a summer. So this session is being hosted by the Kansas Water Institute. I'll let you take it away, Susan.
Thank you, Crystal. So no pressure, but one of our panelists during the lunchtimes characterized this panel as epic. So we hope not to let you down. And just to get us started, how many of you in the room, this is your first time you're learning anything about TAPS and the TAPS program? Got a handful. Excellent. Very good. And how many of you are well seasoned? You know all about TAPS. You love talking about TAPS. All right, a good mix. So we're going to make sure those of you who raised your hands first are super curious to keep learning about TAPS, and really in the theme of this conference too, being able to expand this great idea in further throughout additional states and regions, and to continually improve upon the existing TAPS programs. So the title of this breakout is Peer Power on Tap. And so I challenge you also to say that 5 times fast at some point today, just for fun. So I'm going to find the clicker. Here we go. All right, we're going to do just a quick, maybe. It is on. Perfect. One more. Yeah. Oh, now I got it. I'll stop touching. Don't touch it. Okay, very good. So first, you'll have a chance to get to know all of our panelists as we dig into some questions, but I just want to briefly introduce them on the screen. So all the way over on the end there is Rorik Paulman. He is a Nebraska farmer and a multi-year TAPS participant, as well as a master irrigator participant. So he'll give us some great producer perspectives. Second in from me is Chris Proctor, UNL Extension educator, and helps run the TAPS program here in Nebraska. Next to him, closest to me, Darren Rednick, runs our TAPS program along with many of our partners in the room in Kansas, and he's our director of sustainable irrigation at K-State. Josephina in the middle, assistant professor of statistics at K-State. You'll quickly learn that we generate a lot of fantastic data through these programs, and Josephina will share what we're doing with that data or the potential for it. And then Mark Bergbach, seated next to her, is also with UNL, Human Dimensions of Natural Resource Management. What are we learning about the producer perspectives as they participate in the TAPS program? So for those of you that raised your hand, and this is your first introduction to TAPS, this is going to be my TAPS 101 before we dig into some questions. So first, TAPS is a season-long farm management competition. So it's basically taking irrigated production agriculture and gamifying it. Producers have the opportunity to join teams of producers and non-producers, agencies, those that are curious and want to learn alongside them. And week by week, they make the same management decisions that somebody who is actively engaged in production agriculture would be. So they make their seed choices, they make their irrigation choices, their fertigation choices, their crop insurance choices, where they're going to sell and market their grain. All of that is run through week by week in an online platform, and then it's actually put into practice on a research farm. And then at the end of the season, the data is collected, and there are cash prizes for those who had the greatest amount of yield or outcome for the least amount of inputs. And that might look a little bit different in each state and region that they're participating. But what's wonderful about this, well, a number of things, being able to partner the research perspective with the on-the-ground management and learn together. But now it has been expanded throughout many states, now is in 8 states and expanding even more beyond that. And to date, since 2017, we've had more than 900 teams participate in that. So there's a lot of power in that participation and the data that it has generated. So want to just quickly also note really the power of the TAPS program is the people and the partnerships that it brings together. These are just a handful of the partners that are engaged in the Kansas program as far as industry in the middle, and then some of the great people that are included. And I am going to leave that one up there and find my seat and dig into some questions. You can clap, Darren. That's good. Excellent. And I think I'll go ahead and start with a question for Darren then for that nice acknowledgement. Darren, so from your perspective, from that research and regional sustainability lens, what makes the TAPS program impactful?
Yeah, well, for starters, for those that do know me, I appreciate you letting me back in Nebraska, even if it's only for a couple days. But yeah, so when we think of sustainability and trying to move towards that, that usually implies that we are missing the target on something, right? And so really, what is that something and that silver bullet that we often try to think about? Well, TAPS allows us to define kind of a challenge within an area and find unique solutions that might work for one person or a different solution that works for somebody else. And so TAPS allows us to be able to capture all that diversity of those operations, but do it in a way that we can actually benchmark and see how to move in a positive direction.
Excellent. So I'll turn it to you, Chris, sort of thinking of it. Why is it important that it's grounded here at a research institution?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always that value of thinking about how is this operation, this management practice better than this one over here. But there's always that challenge, right? If you have a farm 6 miles apart, how do you decide, you know, what they're doing at this farm is more effective than a farm down the road? Different weather, different soil. There's so many confounding factors. I think it's really hard. And so by forcing everybody into one location, one field, same environmental conditions, same soil, and then asking people to make those decisions, you get to see how those decisions play out. You get really what's the effect of those management decisions, or what's the effect of using that technology to inform decisions. And it's that benchmarking, right? And so it also, we can do it a little bit smaller scale. We can kind of bring our research expertise, replicated plots, right? There's some things we can embed using some of our research equipment to implement it. I think that gives us a little more flexibility on how we capture that data. And then I think being able to bring research staff and folks into the program, there's beyond just the competition itself. I think there's questions that get asked along the way. So you can say, what are all the participants deciding? And if we implemented this research question alongside that, how does that play out relative to what everyone else is doing? So, I mean, those are a handful of things that would come to mind at least.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Rurik, from your perspective, you're incredibly busy. You participate in a lot of activities. You're invited to be on so many different boards and things. What made you decide that the TAPS program participation was worth your time?
We're in a position in agriculture today of this precision and AI, and there's tons of tools that come across our desk and in our office, and the data that we're being fed and based off of seeding, genetics, crop fertility. I mean, all of those things it's an enormous data set that we have to try and sort through and decide at our level, what are we going to use? Which piece of that, which portion are we going to pick out of the millions of different opportunities that are put in front of us? And so the TAPS piece allowed us, and all those come with a cost. Inherently, you're going to do things that your grandfather, your father, and your local trusted advisor group, your agronomists, your other people that are involved, you're going to do business that way because of that trusted network. And yet, those opportunities that exist outside, where can you use those and take the risk off? And the idea that a moisture probe is $10 an acre, a digital imagery service, it's always interesting. They would come and say, for $5 an acre, we'll give you an image. I said, okay, that's fine. But I didn't know what to ask about that image. Is how often were they? What's the frequency? What's the resolution? You know, what's the pixel strength? And who stitches that together in the algorithm to give you an actionable picture? TAPS put that in a perspective. TAPS put that in a place by having those replicated trials, having all of the participants, and most of it's not just one person as a team. I've helped coach and work with multiple membership teams. There's been as many as 7 or 8 or 10 to a team. We had one from NDNR that I helped years ago. They won the competition, and they wanted to know what ag was like. But the reason that it captured my attention is it took all the components. It took marketing, it took crop insurance, it took those things. And so I could stretch the limits of even what we did on our own farm and expand those and bring in some of those components because they're not free. There's an upcharge to put those in. And if it didn't have an ROI, a return on our investment, either in reduced inputs or protection or stewardship of resources, it was difficult to implement. That was the reason for me to get involved and to help develop the program. So I have to tell you that I won it the first year, and my son finished 4th, and he runs our commercial operation. We farm approximately 8,000 acres, and about 80% of that's groundwater irrigated out of the Ogallala. And the difference was I marketed, he evaluated all the other costs and inputs, but the marketing that year in particular happened to outshine that portion of it, of the business model. So it's an incredible platform for producers and others that are non-ag people to really take a look inside of with a different set of lenses and have some fun with it.
Awesome. Thanks, Rourke. So Josephina, Rourke described the amount of data that comes in not only for the TAPS program, but normal farming operations. What are some of the data that you are collecting through the TAPS program, and maybe a couple of your initial insights?
So some of the data we're collecting, they include all the different management decisions, from what technology they use to how much water and when, how much nitrogen and different fertilizers and when, all sorts of management decisions that will, in the end, they will affect yield. But it's tricky to single those out and which management decision had what effect. And sometimes it's easier to find out the effects of some, and others are trickier to investigate or to find out what their real effect is. So that's, I guess, at this point, it's the data we have is mostly about management in different sites and different weather conditions. And now we all have to work together to make that data make sense and take all the outputs we want to ask from the system.
Excellent. You do love data.
Yeah.
Mark, some of the data is also the human element, right? The socioeconomic piece. So you've done some work looking at the pre and post knowledge changes of participants. Maybe say a little bit more about that and some of the consistent takeaways that you've seen.
Sure. Yeah, I had to take some notes so I can say something coherent, hopefully, to you. So, with regard to knowledge, the overall kind of piggybacking on what Rourke said is that eye-opening experience for participants, questioning what they thought they knew, and when compared to the results of others, is questioning what did I really know, and now maybe I didn't know as much as I thought I did. I'd like to read a quote. What represents that is, the first year I put on 240 pounds of nitrogen, I figured I wasn't going to be anywhere close to where I needed to be. The person that won it went with 180 pounds. So it blew me out of the water. So that's kind of where everything changed for me, that I looked at things differently. With regard to risk reduction, TAPS, as ROI, Rourke mentioned, is allowed producers to try some things they may have wanted to do on their farms, but didn't know if the risk or investment was worth it. And then here's a quote. I think that was telling, not trying anything has just as big a risk as trying something. In with regard to peer learning, producers found their peers particularly helpful in areas in which they had little experience, such as grain marketing and technology. And also, I think it's important to note that a lot of the networks that were created have remained after the competition.
Nice. Thanks, Mark. So that's sort of the formal evaluation from the socioeconomic piece. But Chris, as an extension educator, what have you seen, maybe more anecdotally, as far as producer participation and response to the program?
Yeah, I mean, I think that low risk environment is a huge piece of it. Rourke alluded to it. I did some back of the napkin math a little while back. If you think about a farming operation as a decision tree, and every time you make a decision, it branches out and you have the next decision. Well, I took five decisions out of the TAPS competition. And you look at all the possible branches off of that. And I came up with 10 to the 44th power of independent potential decisions. And so that's a really big tree. And if you're farming, every one of those branches, like Rourke said, it comes with a cost. And so when I think about kind of the extension side and folks being able to engage in kind of that low risk environment, they can test out those different branches on a tree and see where it takes you and what is the result of that. And I think the other power of it is being able, not just I make this decision, this is the outcome, but I get to see it in a community. And I think that's really the power of the extension side is it's that cohort, it's that network. I can hide behind my team number. I don't have to get called out for making bad decisions, but I can see immediately where do I rank amongst the other 30 teams that are competing, and who's making decisions that leads to the outcome that I'm interested in, and what did they do to get there? And I think it's reckoning with that process is where a lot of the power comes in. And so we've had a number of folks go back home based on what they learned and say, I'm going to cut 60 pounds of nitrogen out of my operation. I have the confidence now based on what I experienced here and what I learned from working alongside other people to make some of those decisions where, a 60-pound reduction without any information to go behind it, that's a challenging decision to make. And so I would say that's where a lot of the value I see on the extension side's come.
Nice. So obviously the full TAPS program goes across a growing season. And I think we've learned a lot just on the gamification approach as far as education and outreach. And then it's been adapted recently for a shortened version, right? The Farm Duel. So Darren, maybe if you can describe what that looks like.
Yeah, so the Farm Duel in a lot of ways is actually trying to simulate what a cropping season looks like and doing it in like a setting like this, right? And so for those here in Nebraska, if you were at the Husker Harvest Days, you probably saw Chuck Burr doing a virtual TAPS element, right? Where you could bring people in, put them through a model. Chris, Kelsey is in the back and a number of others. Last year, we decided to go ahead and put it into action, and we call it Farm Duel. Really, that stems off of when we first started up TAPS back in 2017. Most people are like, oh, that's like fantasy farming, right? Fantasy football. And it's like, all right, we're going to play with that, right? And so we're going to go ahead and get a big screen, put the football game on, but we want to put people through what it's like to grow a crop. And so we went and have the DSAT model. It's a crop model that allows us to go ahead and put inputs in, and then we can pull them out. And so what we're trying to do is we have Rourke's and a lot of his peers competing. Well, that's a 11 to 12 month process, right? From kickoff to when they get the results at the banquet in January. So how do we actually give an opportunity like that within a single evening? And that's what we've done with Farm Duel. It's different, right? And there's a lot of assumptions around the modeling, but as Josephina mentioned, we have the data that we can actually start to pull from so we can provide some insights and then allow, again, experts like Josephina to bring value out of that.
Awesome. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Josephina. So I know we have some computer science students in the room. AI was brought up during our lunchtime. Maybe just talk about some of the tools that you're using to analyze the data and maybe what role AI or machine learning might play into that.
Right. So right now we're currently analyzing the data sort of to analyze, first of all, the combination of the different water and nitrogen practices you could take and sort of exploring the optimal combinations of the two and the most efficient combinations of the two. And that also has implications on risk. So we're looking at both you could say the mean, the average of your yields, and also looking at how risky it is to take one management decision or the other, and that would be affecting the variance or basically the risk, right? And so far we're working mostly with statistical models and Bayesian models to quantify that uncertainty, because we are looking at that specific relationship that we want to study with a more mechanistic model, if that makes sense. Whereas machine learning and AI tools, I see more for predictions. Once you have a given set of management decisions, you could predict how well or not you would perform under different weather scenarios, for example. I could see that as a very viable application of machine learning. But yeah, in the end, it's going to be a combination of the machine learning tools that are more for predictions and are not so able to explain the mechanics behind the processes as well as more classical stats models. But yeah, there's definitely room for everyone to participate here.
Excellent, thanks. Rorik, you mentioned that now you're helping to coach some other teams. What are some advice you give to either existing teams walking them through the process or somebody that might be curious about participating in the TAPS program?
Well, I have to be fully transparent. Dr. Rudnick talked me into going to Oklahoma with Dr. Jason Warren and participating in Oklahoma. And I said, sure, let's go do it. And I'm probably not the most humble person in the whole wide world, but I was absolutely humbled in Oklahoma. I finished dead last the first year. And again, I think it's very respectful of the regional and regulatory expectations of each and every state and every basin, sub-basin, and whatever the conditions are. TAPS helps to identify and really, I believe, give the regulatory people, state, local producers, researchers, industry partners the opportunity to refine and define the tools that they're handing to us. Because I've invested in a lot of startup companies that were around this data support tools for making irrigation decisions, and many of them are now gone. And yet there was a cost that it took to get there. And so the idea of this model and of this relationship is huge. And everyone, whatever interest you have, whether you want to provide or you think you've got the next silver bullet, that this is the platform. This is the place to do it. The producer side is peer learning. It's the people that we trust. You heard me say our trusted network. And it may not always be your land-grant university or your local NRD or your local agronomist. It literally is, how do you develop that peer network and that trust that you can make that investment, not only in changing your behavior, but the monetary piece that goes along with it. Because the risk is huge. The numbers that we discuss when you talk about profitability and margins, typically they're not great. So it's scale and it's really refinement. And this platform creates that opportunity. And I would encourage, no matter what your role is, it really doesn't matter. That I think that there's takeaways from this platform that are not only unique to your interests, but also to your area. I will say this about Oklahoma. It took me 4 years to finally finish in the top 5 because those guys are remarkable. But I didn't understand when you apply 150% of ET to grow a crop, we don't have to do that where I am. Now, we fully irrigate, typically, but the idea that we're about 50% of the crop coefficient is what we apply in supplemental irrigation. So I was using the tools that I'd been handed or learned or passed down. So it's remarkable to watch the other states and then turn around, how do we help inform producers and support them?
Thanks, Rorik. So we have learned a lot as the program has expanded, just over time. There's always tweaks and improvements. And then whenever a new state adopts a program, we learn from that as well. But Mark, from your perspective, what you're hearing, what are some things that could be adapted to better meet our producer needs and participants in the program?
To be adapted. Well, first, I would love to hear from the participants with that very question, the feedback from them about that. But I'm going to flip your question a bit. I think to better inform policy across the Great Plains and lessons from TAPS is to add gamification elements to extension and outreach. We've had success in extension education outreach and field days of on-farm demonstrations, but this gamification competition adds elements and more power and impact than those traditional methods. So seeing how you stack up with your peers and fellow participants is very powerful. And playing a game together lowers barriers, diminishes boundaries, and increases familiarity in a safe environment. Moreover, we need to consider incorporating gamification elements into collaborative endeavors that involve people with diverse backgrounds and perspectives.
Nice. I appreciate that. I don't know how many of you in the room either participate in field days or host field days, but from my own perspective, I've seen that just hosting the same old field day just doesn't get the same draw of participation that it has in the past. It used to be having a really good barbecue lunch was enough to draw a lot of people in and have really great discussion. And now people are busy in new ways, and gamification, something different, a new approach is we're finding a way that at least engages people in a new way. So Darren and Chris, so this, the home of TAPS is here in Nebraska, and then it is now expanding to, I think, 8 other states. Is that correct? Maybe remind the audience who the other 8 states are and talk a little bit about that expansion process and some of the regionality.
Yeah.
Arm
So
wrestle.
we work closely together, so there might be a little ribbing involved in how we answer this. But it definitely started in Nebraska. And so we take credit for that, for whatever that's worth. But so yeah, Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, Alabama, Maryland are kind of the existing states. And then Texas is looking to bring on a program next year, as well as Illinois and Michigan. So that's kind of how it's spread. I think it's interesting that each location has taken a slightly different approach to it. Every region's a little bit different. So Maryland, for example, their whole program is built around soybean right now. You did forage this year down in Kansas. I think Texas is talking about doing peanut taps, right? And so it's just, we haven't had peanuts in taps yet. And so I think there's some value just having that regionality to it. I'll add this one piece, and then I'll let Darren fill in where I've missed. But what's interesting to me when you think about when you think about the opportunity of TAPS is, I think there's a piece of it that now I'm losing my train of thought. I'm going to give it to Darren, then I'm going to come back when I remember my train of thought.
It's gonna be amazing.
Yes.
We do this a lot.
Yeah, it is kind of funny sometimes when Chris and I are on a panel because we say a lot of the same stuff. That probably means we're hanging out a little too much. But yeah, so when we think about TAPS across all the different locations, I think oftentimes how those programs get established, usually there are specialists that have research extension appointments, and they are trying to figure out creative ways to better connect with their constituents. And that is both their end user, right? Maybe a producer, but then also how do they actually support their program? And that might be with the industry or the tech sector. TAPS does offer a platform to be able to engage a broader audience. It's not just the farmer, it's not just the researcher. We can pull in a lot of different people, and then they can go ahead and leverage both local opportunities, right? So visiting what are the challenges, and then what are some of the solutions that we can incorporate within a program. But then when we start thinking about the bigger opportunity, right? And so, we had started TAPS in Nebraska. We focused in visiting with Nuba, where Rourke was the chairman and helped create and start that years ago. So we designed it very specific for that location. As Chris indicated, Nicole Furialone, a little tough for last name. But yeah, okay. So they obviously designed it in a different way. But the neat thing here is when we start looking about the opportunities to leverage both our resources locally, but then also the expertise, because I think you've probably heard across this entire panel, we're really looking at how the system operates, right? We're not just the irrigation engineer or the cropping systems or, go down the line. So we need diversity and expertise. And by having the ability to leverage, the social scientists or the behavioral scientists in Nebraska, we have some brilliant economists down in Texas, and we have some amazing. So now we're creating that network, and we've been able to be pretty successful in leveraging funding opportunities because now we can leverage expertise and then we can leverage the data. And so that's where like Josephina and some of the opportunities that we're presenting now, what are some of those drivers? And so I don't know if we answered
Yeah.
that question, but
It was great.
I remember what I was gonna say. I'll just,
Oh,
I'll tack this on. So what's interesting is with most participants never set foot in the field, right? And you'd never necessarily recommend a farmer never walk out in their field to see what's going on. I mean, that would be, best practices. You got to understand your system. But with TAPS, you might never walk into that field. And so I really think it forces people to think about the data and how do I use data to make the decisions. And Rourke alluded to that in Oklahoma. There was a learning curve that goes with how do I interpret the data. And that's where I think having TAPS across all these locations is really fascinating. They're somewhat regionally focused, but I think there's value in participating across all those regions just from a data decision-making standpoint.
Awesome. Anybody in the audience participated on a TAPS team? Kelsey, anybody else? All right, Kelsey, what are some takeaways that you had from participating?
Occurred that first year. And then the team I participate on is a crowdsourced team. So we poll the public, this is the conditions our producers are seeing in the field, this is the data behind that plot. What would you do? Knowing all our producers have that. So getting that added insight and dialogue, general public about what are we seeing, what's in the field, what are farmers facing today, and then turning that into an actionable. And Chris, your point too, to not be in the field, because I travel a lot, so I'm not if I have a task plot, I'm not in that plot very often. Being able to monitor that from the road and some of those data points that the grower I don't use at home, I'm getting to play with them there, but it's very cheap and high for data and at home and there, even if I didn't adopt technology.
Excellent. Thanks, Kelsey. Anybody else been a team member, gone to a TAPS event? All right, Dr. Ray, share that experience.
So what they're very cleverly that they're running a very sophisticated crop model. And they're making the decisions based on that model and week by week they're updating what will be their lead and all. So it's the one way to. And same thing, we have also a cotton model, not that can predict the fiber length and fiber quality strength. And so somebody is willing to do a cotton TAPS,
Ooh.
can give that model.
That'd be good. Cotton TAPS. Excellent.
We have a Chat GPT team this year, so AI is competing right alongside everybody else. We'll see how it comes out.
Thanks. Good. We'll take a pause here just to see if there's any questions from the audience for our panelists. What's on your mind? In the back.
I heard the mechanistic models. Something related using machine learning for mechanistic models. Did I get it right?
I was referring to the two in separate applications. Definitely you could apply them combined. It will always depend on your objective. And I didn't want to go deep in the different objectives you could have. So very broadly, right now we're using more mechanistic, where you actually define you know how the yield will respond to water input, nitrogen input, the two together, and kind of explore that optimal region of management, only looking at those two, for example. And actually, we're using that to, just in case all the teams didn't pick the best combinations, we're adding them ourselves to explore that space and actually finding out if that was actually better or no, right? Because other than that, you can only estimate, but you're only estimating with some uncertainty, right? But
Since
yeah.
you brought a point before, the statistical model and Bayesian model, and you said right now you were exploring the management data landscape. Could you briefly tell us about what that management data looks like and how you were actually fitting the Bayesian and statistical models, given we have so much uncertainty in that space, and how you're accounting for that uncertainty?
Yeah, so the uncertainty, it's true. There's so much uncertainty. That's one of the reasons to use a Bayesian model that basically uses, will give you probabilities of response, the whole probability distribution, if you may. That's one of the reasons we use a Bayesian model. And also because the Bayesian model allows you to introduce prior information about how your system works. And it's not that we're going blind into how the system works. We know a lot about how the system works. So that's another reason to use a Bayesian model. And now I lost my train of thought.
Want Darren to answer?
Yes, please. And so we use that Bayesian model. Oh, and how to we account for different management decisions. So there's so, if you looked at how many decisions the farmers can, or the teams can make, there are so many, which is, I think, the coolest thing ever from TAP's programs. Because if someone is curious about how something works, they can try it out with very low risk, right? Because otherwise, each dollar per acre adds up, and it's just more risk that you're taking in the end. That said, having so many management decisions, right now we're putting them all in the same bucket of like other management decisions, because sometimes you don't have enough information or enough people who tried something out under, and so you would test it under different conditions, and sometimes it just goes to more uncertainty at this point. If it was something we want to really look into, we would design for that. Yeah.
Can I add to that just a little bit? Let's take genetics, let's take seed. We no longer plant a hybrid more than 1 or 2 years, so it becomes a different set to implement into that decision model. And with that, the information we're getting back from the companies, that by soil type, by seeding rates, under this set of environmental conditions, we can hone in on that particular activity, but it still has to do with variable seeding rates. And that's another one that is hard in that small of a plot. In large fields, we may change seeding rates 8 or 9 times today. And yet, how do you go out and sample 8 or 9 times of that? And so inside of TAPS, it allows us to do that, but we have to be really, really careful and make that assessment of the system. And that it drives a huge amount of our change in so many different ways. We used to institutionally, when we had a hybrid, we'd plant it for 5 years. We would have a corn planter for 10. We would have a pivot telemetry decision tool. We'd have it without updates. And now we're almost in a continuous improvement. So this platform allows us to step back and probably even reevaluate some of those things. So I'm curious about how we're going to keep up with that process of inside of that, in that model, to really kind of keep that expression relative, I guess.
Right. So yeah. So ideally, you want to have things in common so that you can compare. And like you were saying, it's best to identify the effect, or how much, let's call it an effect, how much impact something has on yield or on risk even, by changing one thing at a time. And that could happen in time. And the whole point of having those mechanistic models, it's basically just telling the model how the system approximately works, so that you can identify whatever you want to change, and see how that would work. I don't know if that makes sense.
Tweak it. We call
Yeah,
it tweak it.
Yeah. But yeah, basically it's complex, but it's doable.
Excellent. Question here.
All your people or connection in management. For instance, in 1 year, one farmer decides to put a lot of nitrogen. The next year, the farmer decides to put 0. But that place, maybe you can have some residue, how that can, do you evaluate that, how that can somehow be like, getting off house?
Great. And if you wouldn't mind just summarizing the question for the folks.
Yeah, so the question really, I think, gets to kind of carryover effects. So for example, one team, they put on, say, 300 pounds of nitrogen. Next year, they put on 0. What kind of carryovers and how do we incorporate that within the design of TAPS? Is that correct? And so really, that is really how we design it. And so most of the competitions right now work with variables that are a little bit easier to manage over years. So water and nitrogen. And so we do have transition areas. So for example, this part of the field will be the odd year competitions, and this part of the field, which was uniformly managed in the odd years, now in the even years, they compete over here. And so you rotate. But because of that, there's inherent challenges because our producers sometimes want to investigate additional opportunities. For example, we worked closely with EcoDrip, a subsurface drip irrigation company out of Hastings, and their parent company, I guess, is out of Texas. But we wanted to look at subsurface drip irrigated competitions. Well, one of the advantages is being able to leverage that system for nutrient application, and specifically not just nitrogen, but getting into micros. Well, it's really hard for me to say, hey, you can put in, a micronutrient like copper. Well, if somebody overloads copper, I just can't take that out in a 2-year period, right? And so that does restrict our ability to really design maybe exactly on the needs. And so there's always give and takes on what we can and can't do. But
Yeah.
I don't know if others have thoughts to that.
We've talked about going to maybe a multi-year competition and just embracing some of those, right? So now you have to manage over a rotation. And so if you added a lot of nitrogen in year 1, you now have to manage through that in year 2 or year 3. And so, but there's just that inherent challenge of how do you ensure uniformity when you start at the beginning.
But that closely simulates what happens on the ground anyway, because we may get excessive rain after an application or a hailstorm or a wind event, some type of natural event that creates that same challenge at the farm level. So I think those places actually represent, again, what actually is going to happen in our cycle, in our cropping cycle. So there's value, I believe, in accounting for that and having that whole socioeconomic piece recognize that and say, hey, I think we undervalue or have not understated the microbiome. I think that we have not dove deep enough into the soil itself and really evaluated it. There's some conventional wisdom, is what I call it, anchored around the Mehlich 3 evaluation system. And should we not be looking at water extractions or some other way to look at the soil test itself? I mean, to me, those are some of the questions that we can ask as a result of that. Can we mitigate that 300 pounds or that excess nutrient or copper or whatever? Is there ways that we can mitigate it? Those are future questions, but again, that with your help, I think it takes dollars, it takes people, but it also takes innovative ideas and partnerships to do that. And we ask industry to do that. And they want us to ask those questions as well, because they don't want to give us a product or take it to the 100,000 farmers that are out there if there's no return to them. If they can't direct their investments, it's a huge deal to be able to do this and actually climb that mountain, about those unique challenges.
Chris Rourke mentioned some of those industry partners, and we have some of them shown on the screen. Can you talk a little bit at how a TAPS participant selects the types of technologies they can use, whether it's arable or AquaSpy, or how they engage with the technologies?
It's evolved over time. Darren might have to fill in some of the history, but there's always that challenge between, do you try to give everybody uniform access to technology, or do you diversify it? And we've kind of landed on the spot. One, there's just a logistic. We have enough teams that it's hard to get one company to donate 125 sensors. And so we've kind of opened it up and allowed industry partners to come in and say, we have this platform, we have this technology, we'd like to get it in front of growers. And that becomes one of the decisions. So now we say we have this suite of different technologies. Give us your top 3 choices and we'll do our best to give you your first or second choice. Right. So especially around soil moisture sensors, that's kind of how we've tended to do it. Other platforms are easier to span across multiple teams. Maybe it's just a web application or remote sensing. And so sometimes we can give those more broadly, but if there's, a physical limitation, a lot of times that's how we've had to handle it.
Nice. Rourke, you kind of alluded to that from an industry partnership perspective, how great it is to have that many customers in one spot, right? And to give you that feedback. So excellent. Some other questions from the audience in the back.
For example, mentioned when you go to Oklahoma, right? For you for 5 years, 10 years to be in the top 5, right? So you may do this thing based on what you observe and you're competing for it. When you're competing for it, there is the inherent bias that you're coming to it. How do you look into that?
I think that's for you, Josephina.
Yes.
Accounting for bias.
Sorry, can you repeat that last part? Because I couldn't understand acoustically.
The inherent bias is the company
Yeah.
model itself. When you're looking at the data, how do you incorporate this bias that will ultimately come into play when there's somebody taking a decision, what to do, what not? Looking at the community and where they are ranking.
It's more of a social question.
I might
like a
be
decision
very
bias, like-
stats
Yeah.
wired in this case could you define bias?
So you're competing to win as opposed to competing.
Oh, I
So
see.
the dollar
Yeah.
amount's driving you maybe more than the agronomic.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. I don't know. I don't know if that's intrinsically wrong, I guess. It's whatever metric you're measuring the competitors for, they're gonna try to optimize for that. And I guess the whole point of TAPS is demonstrating that that's probably not affecting your profit as much. Am I right? I don't know.
Yeah.
It can. I mean, it just, it comes down to, like Chris said, what award are they going for?
Right, yeah.
Mhm.
What knowledge of the system are they coming in with?
We've definitely had folks compete without, they say, I'm not as worried about winning this thing. I really want to know what happens if I cut 100 pounds out of, and just, I don't want to see what happens. All right. So they're coming at it from a different side. It's hard to tease that out. I mean, it is. And you see it in the data. We get this huge range of outcomes across nitrogen amounts, irrigation, right? It's all kind of baked in. And I don't know. I mean, I don't really know how you handle it.
Darren and Chris, could you talk a little bit about and maybe for the crowd, that there's a zero, I mean, there's a couple of metrics in there that maybe ferret out some of that.
Yeah, real quick, I guess, we've kind of listening to the panel, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of the extension piece and the grower engagement, right? And so we're offering a platform. Well, there's a whole nother element of, we are researchers as well, right? And so we are collecting a lot of data, whether it's baseline information to understand the system so that we can better understand how people won and why they won. And so because of that, we do incorporate design parameters within that. So we do have control plots, for example, that the efficiency is based off of what happens if no water, no nitrogen are incorporated. There's a lot of interest on how does genetics play into as compared to how I manage my water nitrogen. Well, we do a strip split plot design so that we can incorporate a reference hybrid across every single team's plots so that we can remove that and see how water and nitrogen responded to the same genetics and seeding rate. And the list goes on and on. So that's the beauty, right? So what we're doing in Kansas is very reflective of the interest that we are getting from our growers as compared to Nebraska. So we can almost sit and talk very much around what are we doing to advance science, and then what are we doing now in extension outreach to be able to provide a platform for self-discovery. And so it's kind of a neat thing depending on how you look at it.
Gaurav.
It's really like a question, but one of the economic side is so much interest across because how it's normalized when it comes down to competition, like let's say like soil water holding capacity, heavier soils versus lighter soil. It's happening in such a like how do you make the difference happen?
Very good. Want to talk about the number of plots they received to account for that heterogeneity?
I'll make one comment and I'll hand it over to the expert. So you have non-statistical people at first thinking they know statistics. That'd be me. And so we overly simplify it, right? In terms of like, oh, we're going to do a randomized complete block design. Oh, well, we know the physical limitations of an irrigation system, right? We don't want one team to have two plots underneath the linear or an irrigation system, because if it breaks down, they lose two replications, right? And so we do have each competition, depending on availability, 3 or 4 replications in some kind of experimental layout. But what we're learning more and more visiting with experts like Josephina is how do we use some of the other forms of data, whether it's, you know, an EC sled or remote sensing, or maybe it's grid sampling. Can we actually pull out? And so maybe it's not just the magnitude of yield, as Josephina was talking earlier. Should the winner really be just the highest yield, or should we actually use statistics to tell us? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I think some people could get really upset. I mean, I would get upset too, because the highest yielding plot or highest yielding average might not be the highest yielding after accounting for spatial effects, you know, and whatever spatial dependencies there are in the field. And that's the whole point where you need statistics, because you're never observing anything perfectly, any system perfectly, and then there's always an underlying effect. There could be an underlying effect, and there's always uncertainty. Maybe we could have, Chris was saying before, maybe there's 3 winners that are not really easy to identify which one was higher and which one was lower. That's probably gonna be it.
Different states like Nebraska and all the states that Chris mentioned, are there being developed and people who are not participating can go back and see what they function for.
Great. So Gaurav's question related to data repositories for all of the different states contributing or participating in TAPS.
Good idea.
Working on it.
We are
Definitely
taking
been
notes.
thought. I can't point you to a website, but we definitely have given it thought.
Awesome. So in our time left, oh, good, excellent. We'll keep going with questions. Nope.
Yeah, I was curious about how, whether you see people who participate repeatedly year after year, the adaptation and approaches develop over time, and what sorts of things you see happening with that sort of repetition. And I know Rorik mentioned this a little bit with the learning in a new place, but I'm wondering if you look more kind of systematically.
Great. So Karina's question was about multi-year participants and if they kind of take lessons learned from season to season. Anybody?
It's a Vermont question.
I just would say, not directly, but we have had feedback that their goals of participating has changed. For example, if they in succeeding years, they want to come back and apply the lessons they've learned in previous attempts. So, well, we haven't looked at it directly, but we do have some evidence that there is some change in why they participate.
Interesting.
But again, overall is, you know, our participants is not a typical farmer. So one, they're younger, and they're the early adopters. But though, that's a good place to start. You want to get those people on board and then that spins out and has effect. But, so the reasons are maybe a little bit different, but that, just the thrill of the competition can't be denied as well. They've really embraced that and kind of come back and feed that beast again for a second time.
And I haven't really repeated, I got out of the way, so that we could expand the program, but I want to take it back one more step is, these decisions typically come with a price. And so I don't care if you're a 500-acre farmer, a 5,000-acre farmer, a 10,000-acre farmer, do the math. At $3 an acre, these decisions that we're doing inside of TAPS are enormous. And finding either the offset for that $3 an acre or the value of that $3 an acre, but writing that physical check that it takes to invest in that decision is huge. And it doesn't sound like much at the end of things, but they're already focused on this system. They are focused on every aspect of this competition in their daily lives. So we plucked that out and we're trying to give that opportunity to pile onto that a little bit. So that what Mark talked about in this opportunity to figure out the young producers that we just said those are the guys that we're getting. Those are the ones that we want, from my perspective, is that they are the future. They will drive a lot of these decisions and help industry bring tools and support and dollars through the research, through this extension direction. To me, that's how the opportunity is going to expand to get those dollars.
So my most important role of moderator is keeping us on time. So I do want to allow time to transition to the next section. And the great thing is there are still a lot of questions in the audience, which means there's lots of conversation to be had with our great panelists and continuing the idea generation. So, but please help me say thank you to our panelists.
Thank you again to this great